Welcome. We're back again, and I'm really happy to see you. This is going to be session 2 in Introduction to Interaction Design, and I want to say welcome and hello to everyone that's viewing from particularly Hong Kong. I know we have quite a few people waiting and joining in the stream already, so I'm really happy to see you all again following yesterday's session. We're going to talk for somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. We're going to take a break in the middle today. The live stream is being recorded today and will be available on the YouTube channel shortly after. And the stream session from yesterday is also now available on the YouTube channel. So as ever, if you have questions, please do put them into the chat right now, and I will read out as we're going through from the monitor over here and answer questions as they come up, or please leave comments on the videos after they're available on YouTube, or you can email me direct at my UE email address, or if you talk with Ricky or any of the other tutors at Shape in Hong Kong, they'll be able to pass on my details to you. And also welcome to all of the members of the general public that may be viewing this after the fact or in the live stream. Please do put questions in. I'm very happy to answer, and I'm also really keen to hear what your points are, what your experiences are, and any examples that you think are relevant, or any questions that you have about the examples that we're looking, because a lot of what we're discussing has strong underpinnings, but there's always discussion, there's always debate. And one of the important things that we talked about yesterday is as we make and design things and put them into the world, the situation changes just by nature of us doing and putting things into the world. So we need to keep looking and evaluating and working through and observing and testing, which is a lot of what we've been discussing yesterday, and we'll pick up today talking particularly about processes. So the session today is about processes and about how we may put in processes to try and make better things. As we had yesterday, I'm in the studio here, and there's a range of building work going on the floor above, which I can't do anything about. And as you saw, we have scaffolding outside the building. Today I'm close miking this, so hopefully we will be able to override any of the challenges with audio. And again, as we did yesterday, there are certain things that I want to show you that ordinarily in a face-to-face lecture situation I would be able to show on a projector and share with you to be able to then discuss. And these are pieces of interviews with designers, material about projects, and other examples that I want to show in an educational context to discuss and contrast. Because we're streaming live on YouTube, YouTube's copyright algorithms sample the audio and they're incredibly aggressive. And rather than fall foul, there are going to be points where I will give you a URL and say, please, will you go and watch this for a period of time? And then we can come back and discuss it. And I wanted to be able to do this live to make it make sense as a live session rather than purely as a pre-recorded webcast. So hopefully that will work, and I'll paste the URLs for videos into the chat channel, and you'll be able to follow them as well. If you have questions about them, please do. And also on the slide sets, which you can download from shape.uedigitalmedia.com, which if I switch to now at shape.uedigitalmedia.com, as ever, is the material for this set of sessions. You can see we have the slide sets from yesterday, and inside the slide sets are links, materials, and all the URLs and examples from the reading list relevant to yesterday, and the PDF slide sets for today are available. So you can go and download them right now from shape.uedigitalmedia.com. and follow along with the material that we're going to be looking at, which also has the URL links embedded into the PDF material. So I'm going to be going through a range of different material. And in the first half, I want to talk about processes. And in the second half, I want to talk about tools and techniques. And the slide set for tools and techniques is also available for you to download live. Picking up from the session yesterday, we went through a whole range of material. We looked at the 21 swings, the swing set example, an interactive musical toy in Montreal, which is based in a bus stop. And as you swing, you generate music based upon the movement of your swinging. And we contrasted that with Incredibox, a drag and drop musical toy. We talked about what was underlying these systems, that essentially they're very, very similar. They have some kind of CPU that's processing software. They have some software with logic written in it. They have musical or audio samples that are recalled. They have an amplifier and a set of speakers. And they have some kind of input from the user, which is selecting different sounds to play, and an internal logic. And we asked the question, what's different between the two and what's common between the two? And looked at this question or this issue of the interaction. This idea that there's something that we can design below the surface, and we can think about what is the experience and how do people interact, not at the representational level of how these things make their effect in the world, but at what is our approach underneath. And one was very embodied and very playful and multi-person explicitly, and the other was very, very one-to-one and very empirically controlled. But the elements of the system were very, very similar. So it was this question of what is going on and what is it that's being designed here to try and deal with this intangible thing of what interaction is. It's not a physical thing that we can pick up, that we can particularly describe the shape of, but there is something definite that is there that we can talk about and we can evidence and we can point at in the world. So we talked about what interaction design is, and we saw an example from Bill Moggridge, who talked about coming out of industrial design and designing the Grid Compass laptop and realizing that what was going on inside the laptop, not the circuitry, not the resistors and the chips and the capacitors and the electricity and the electrons moving around, but the cognitive space in there of the interactive elements became the much more interesting thing to design and was a bigger design challenge to see the beginning of some of these things. We looked at Don Norman's example and watched his short video about 3 ways that good design makes you happy, talking about how the organization and the presentation of things in the world actually changes brain chemistry, changes how you think about them, and realizing that the design of these elements that Bill Moggridge talks about actually has a significant effect on our ability to do things and about how we feel. We talked about the 7 stages of action, and we looked at some of the current trends in interaction design and user experience, and particularly picked up on this issue of the idea of surface decoration. What some people call the aesthetics of interaction is different from interaction design itself and the experience, and talked about meaning underneath, to try and dig below the surface. And we looked at Microsoft's vision of the future, productivity vision, and we also looked at Berg's media surface vision, which again were 2 radically different examples. One incredibly active, where the product is taking center stage and is mediating communication between different people and is pushing notifications and alerts, but is very seductive in its aesthetic, lots of swiping and lots of bouncing and lots of shiny logos and beautiful aesthetics. And the Berg vision, which was about information retreating into the background and being available but not interrupting, not distracting, has a very, very different aesthetic based upon experience. We talked about comparing these two visions and asked the question of what is happening below the surface. And this is really the important question, is if there's something happening below the surface, how do we go about thinking about what is below the surface, if that is what interaction design is concerned with? That's what user experience is, where we're talking about the actual mental experiences, emotional experiences of users, rather than the surface layer of what the color of the icons are. What's happening below the surface, and how might we think about that, understand it, and design for it, this intangible space that Bill Moggridge talked about, these cognitive processes that Don Norman talked about, the calm space that Jack Schultz from Berg talked about. How might we design for that? So I left you with a question, a task, to go out and have a look at all the interruptions in your daily life. To look at what is intruding. Maybe it's information that you want, but it's intruding into your daily life, and ask you the question of how might you think about presenting that in a different way to make it ambient or embedded or pervasive or wearable, something that makes it contextually relevant. And I was wondering if anybody, if you are happy to. Curious Cat's come up and said, yes, I've written down my most annoying digital interruption. Please do. Cat and anybody else, please post in the interruptions. The builders have joined us. They are announcing how much they're liking the lecture so far. So I will do my very best to keep going over the top of the builders who are upstairs applauding with hammer drills and reshaping the building, and keep going. So please do post into the chat the things that you observed about the digital interruptions in your everyday life, and we'll have a brief discussion. Alternatively, please put them into the comments after the video has been put online. But this is a question of looking at the interruptions in your everyday life and thinking, how could this be presented in a different way? In the way that we saw a lot of the information that was presented in the Microsoft vision and the Berg vision, the Berg-Dentsu vision, was coming from similar processes, from databases, from live communication, from information, but being presented in radically different ways. One of which was interrupting the user, and the other of which was complementing and being available should the user choose to search for it or seek it. So the purpose of that design activity, to ask you to start to look, was to say, can you look around you and differentiate between this surface layer and what the intention is beneath the surface? What is the purpose of this? What is the communication? What is the meaning? And how we might design for that. So I'm seeing the stream is filling up with more and more users, so I'd like to welcome everyone. Please do give me a wave or give me a hand, a hello, give me a thumbs up as you are joining us. And let me see if I can get a list of participants in the live chat. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us again today. And as you can hear, King Chan is saying hello. So hello to everyone that's joining us. Please do say hello. It's really nice to see you. Kat is saying Windows 10 spontaneous multiple notifications when opening Chrome or Edge if you allow notifications on Facebook. Yeah. Daniel, Cha Chung, Matthew, Iowa, Janet, Isaac, hello. Yeah. Thank you very much to everyone that's joining us again. And Anthony, and Kat is saying, Curious Kat is saying, I have all these notifications coming at you all at once. The most annoying thing is every time you click away a notification, a new one popped right up. Nobahiro is saying, hello. Carlos, Starla, hi. Wai Hung Lee, hello. Anthony Yu, hello. Yes, absolutely. This issue about push notifications, and we see this on a mobile phone, and I use Signal, which is an end-to-end encrypted private messaging app in place of WhatsApp, because it's actually private. David, Anthony, hello, and it pushes notifications at me. And the model of so much of the technologies that we have is about pulling us to be connected all the time. Every single thing that happens inside the computer wants our attention. Possibly some of this is because it's an extension of an advertising-driven model of software development, particularly around the web, which is only one way that things could have been built, but it's the way that things are monetized now. And that's based upon taking people's attention. And there is a discussion around the attention economy, in that each of us has a certain amount of attention that we can put to things, and advertisers are vying for it and essentially mining us for our attention. So the notifications are not necessarily helpful in that sense, but they are pulling us to engage more and more with individual pieces of software, so that we spend more time looking at Instagram, so that we spend more time looking at Facebook, so we spend more time looking at Twitter, because every minute that they can take of our attention actually turns into revenue on the other side. But it doesn't necessarily benefit us as users. And this model, in some instances, is a perfectly viable model and is completely understandable, is copied and taken elsewhere, so that everything that happens within inside a computer is a notification of equal importance and becomes what's known in the trade as a noisy channel. And there is no differentiation between saying this is actually important, your house is on fire, and somebody that you very distantly know has just had some nice supper and has posted a picture of it. And these two things are not differentiated. So I think Kat's point about notifications, really interesting, of these annoyances. And I was wondering if anybody out there had thoughts about how you could change this, about how you could make these things potentially more context aware, in that the notifications have no idea whether I'm asleep or I'm awake, I'm in a meeting or I'm not. The tools for filtering are very, very crude, and everything is striving for the highest level of attention. So partly this is just an exercise to ask you to think and look and try and imagine below the surface what's going on, and to think about simplicity and expressiveness and the idea of interaction design below the surface, to make decisions about that, about how you want to interact, and then being able to instantiate that in the world in a particular way, implementing those decisions in a particular way. In that we saw particularly that the Microsoft vision and the Berg vision were completely at odds in some sense. One was about ambience and elevating the status of the user in the system, and the other was about elevating the status of the system to the users. So have a think about this through today. Kat is saying, I would design, you have multiple notifications when you have more than 5 notifications as a solution. Yeah, potentially. You could, if you want that to say, there's a lot going on, how would you say there's only a small amount going on? And do those things stack up to actually dealing with notifications in a different way, to say, I can ignore that for now. Oh, now there's 10 or 15, I will go and look at them all in one go. Is that a process that you might want? Or do you want small notifications and to attend to them with this sort of context switching all the time? And to start to think about these, as Kat is seeing, Curious Kat is seeing, start to think about them in a structural way beneath the surface is exactly where we want to go. So I asked you at the end to go and have a look at gov.uk, who talked about how we design better services and how we improve them, and also came up with some really specific examples of why better design saves time, saves money, improves efficiency, and actually makes people happier. The session today if I move to this, the session today is talking about processes in interaction design. We've got Janet is saying a couple of things. She's saying, I want to design a pillow to sense the human body dynamics. If the human body hasn't moved for a long time, it will be deemed to have fallen asleep. The lights in the room will be turned off, and related items will also be turned into sleep mode. Really interesting question, really interesting point. I think to look at things like that, what's good is to start with the why, and to think about what process we might use to try and design better things. And the examples I want to talk about today are about some of the challenges and pitfalls that we see around us, some of the areas where design has not worked very well, and talk about how we, as a repeatable process, can adopt strategies to help us be more creative, to make better things, and to avoid making mistakes more often. So what I want to talk about is how processes are important. We looked at gov.uk, and we saw an example yesterday, briefly talking about what it is that they do. The government service manual is online, and the government digital service team that was assembled to say, we have a problem. We're moving more and more digital information online as a government. Everything from how do I register my car to how do I find out about my legal rights, about my maternity payments, how do I apply for a passport, what is the government advice for traveling abroad, what is the government policy about policing. All with thousands of disparate sites, some of which were never used. And the government digital team sat down and said, well, actually, we need to think about what design process we're going to use. And this is a question that I raised yesterday, is try not to hold on to the first idea that you come up with. If the first idea is a really good one, it's okay. After you've had a look at some others, it'll still be there and be strong. But often we go straight away to the things that we think we know. And also, we only design things that we know how to build. And this is a real challenge, that we very rarely think of designs or processes that we don't already know how to build. So actually, we become victim to the available tools rather than an appropriate solution or design, and then working out how to design or implement that. So processes allow us to get away from the frailties of our own preconceptions and our own mistakes and prejudices, and also the designer's desire to be great, to be genius, to be fluid, to be instantly creative, and to come up with a great idea straight away, rather than to see design as a process of investigation, of understanding, and supporting. So the government digital service designed a manual about how to design services. And then they started to use that and apply that. And the service design manual is available at www.gov.uk service manual, and you can follow the link from the slide set. And it goes through a range of different processes that allows new designers to come in, join the team, and implement services that are consistent. And this is one of the things that we saw yesterday, is that they said, we're bringing things together so that not only do they look and feel similar, but they work in similar ways. So if you understand how to navigate part of the website to register a building change, you know pretty much how to navigate other parts of the website to find out different things about refuse collection, about sanitation, about transportation. And when people come to design, there's a set of design paradigms or gestalts that can be reused and also studied and improved so that there is consistency, and the consistency aids comprehension. And interestingly, one of the things is that when people don't see consistency in digital tools, there's risk. People employ different search strategies to go through websites. Some people do not really like to explore in the sense of being insecure that they might end up somewhere and not be able to get back. If you take it to the analogy of a physical space such as a building, to just wander off down unsigned corridors is a little bit exciting. It's a little bit risky. You might get lost. You might not be able to find your way back. Other people really enjoy that risk of being able to explore through software, having no idea where they'll end up or what dialog box they'll end up in or what menu subsection they might end up in. And things that have internal consistency, i.e. the signage seems clear, you know where you are and you can orientate yourself inside a building or website, makes people feel secure. And there's actually quite a big gender bias that's been reported, especially from people like Margaret Burnett, who do a great deal of work of looking at gender biases in search strategy and in interaction design, is that when people aren't secure about solid internal consistency, signage and navigation, they're cautious about exploring. And having consistency assists everyone, the highly technically adept and adventurous, and the less technically proficient, to be able to access the services and the goals that they have. So the Service Design Manual provides a look and feel, structural consistency, and also talks about technology. And one of the important things was about looking at the collaboration of the departments that are generating the information underneath. So the Service Design Manual goes through a number of different steps. And the first is about discovery. Who are the stakeholders involved in this element of the website? Who might the users be? And what are the principal things that the users actually want to do? They then build tests. They build alpha versions and they try them with people and they observe what people do, how they respond to them, how well they perform. And then they iterate and produce a beta version and launch and keep watching and iterating to see, are the guesses that we made in the design process actually coming out correctly, or have we made incorrect guesses and we need to improve the quality of the guesses and go back and iterate on the design. And this avoids one of the really big things that we see designers saying within the world of software and interaction is, it's not my fault, it's the user's fault because they're using it wrong. And I'm going to pause and let that sink in for a moment. This is possibly something that you know and you've heard. This is perfectly good. This is perfectly great as a piece of road, a piece of design, a piece of interface, a website, a piece of software, whatever else it may be. It's just people are using it wrong. Perhaps it's actually the designers misunderstood what it is that people want to do and how they might use something. Now, if there's a specific way and people don't know that, perhaps that piece of software or that design or that object isn't particularly easy to understand. And maybe you could explain that, perhaps with what Don Norman called affordances, i.e. making it apparent how this wants to be used. And if not, perhaps what you need to do is actually provide help or guidance through the process. So the beta is really important. And then the project goes live. And at some point, that project will end. And this is something that we know about all products and software. They will stop being used. They will become obsolete. They will be superseded by version 2 or version 3 or version 4, or they will come to end of life and be discontinued. And because we know this, we should actually plan for what happens when we shut this down. We see this across the web. The web is 25 years old and is built on the internet, which has got much older data, but we're seeing obsoleting. Only just a few days ago, the Adobe Flash plugin was obsoleted and huge amounts of web-based software stopped working. And that was known for quite a long time. It was an interesting interactive technology that was full of security holes and had a lot of passionate supporters and a lot of passionate criticism of it, but it was known for a long time that it was going to be retired. And a lot of that material, that data inside it, is gone. So everything that you build will be retired. And I'm going to, at risk of getting a copyright ban on YouTube here, I'm going to play you back the short video that we looked at yesterday, and you can also follow this online at the URLs that are in the slide set. So bear with me while I juggle half a dozen different pieces. So this is from Government Digital Service, talking about creating a website for the nation and reiterating these simple points that we saw yesterday about going that extra mile that perhaps takes you a few more hours, but potentially benefits millions of users to find what they need more easily.
Hi, I'm Maddie Adiwumi. I work at the Government Digital Service, and I'm here to tell you about GovUK. We launched Gov.uk in October 2012. It replaced the two big central government websites, DirectGov and BusinessLink. The idea was to make something simpler, clearer and faster, something focused on users. Firstly, we took a careful look and worked out what services and information we actually needed to deliver. We thought, for instance, that we could probably stop spending taxpayers' money telling people how to have a when abroad, or how to identify different kinds of waves. We eliminated thousands of pages that no one ever visited. Then we made sure that the information we were providing was as easy to find and to follow as possible. This, for example, is the page on DirectGov that tells you about bank holidays. Now, it has all the information you need, and you'd think it'd be hard to do it better. But looking at how people actually use the site, we realised that what most people were searching for was the date of the next bank holiday. So we put that right at the top of the page, big and bold. We've done the same thing to more complex tasks, like working out how much maternity pay you're entitled to. Before, on DirectGov, you'd need to read all this information. On gov.uk, you just need to answer a few simple questions, and the site calculates the answer for you. In April 2013, we finished moving all departmental sites to gov.uk, together with the sites for Number 10 and the Deputy Prime Minister's office. So instead of every government page having a different design and different navigation, every site now looks and works the same way. At the same time, we've rethought how policy is presented online. Before gov.uk, if you wanted to understand government policy on something like gangs, for instance, you'd have needed to visit all these separate pages. Now, there's a single page for each policy, and all the departments involved share the responsibility for keeping it up to date. You can even subscribe to those policy pages so that you're always kept informed of any changes. And if you're responsible for a particular policy, you can find out how often it's being looked at and how closely it's being read. Today, gov.uk is handling more web traffic than the site it replaced at a far lower cost, and users get to the information they need quicker than they did before. Gov.uk is not perfect, and it's not finished. It's never going to be. It's designed to improve, to react to user needs. We've made thousands of changes to gov.uk, and we make small improvements almost every day. This idea, iterative, responsive change, is at the heart of everything we do. You should visit us at www.gov.uk. Hopefully, you'll see something you like. Something simpler, clearer, and faster.
So that's their brief introduction. And from this, we see these key principles put in place of discovery, of building, of going live, of retirement. And from it, they have a number of principles. The most important being starting with needs, which is more complicated than it sounds. Because we guess that we know, as designers, as engineers, as scientists, what other people need. Therein is our first trap, our first pitfall. It's parodied in so many comedy sketches of people going, I know exactly what you need. There is a designer, disability rights advocate called Liz Jackson, who I was privileged enough to see speaking at the Interaction Design Conference last year in Seattle, who talks about this challenge, about the idea that designers need empathy. And this is something that's discussed a lot, that we should have empathy for our users. And her argument was designers need empathy when they've excluded users from the conversation. Rather than actually going and finding out what people want, or what people already do, or what people need, we guess based upon what we think they should do. And this is our first trap. And one of the things that gov.uk said is start with the needs. And we see this in the video that we've just seen. We could say, here are all the dates for national holidays. There you go. But actually, what people are needing is not all the dates for national holidays. They just want to know about predominantly the next one. So let's make that the easiest one to find. And then, as we saw Jack Schultz talking about in Berg yesterday, with their Berg Dentsu vision of the future, and actually Kat was raising in the chat just a moment ago about notifications pushing and all being of equal importance and being overpowered with them, of making the most important things the most accessible, and then layering the information so that other information is available, but actually it's based upon the needs of the user in a particular context. And we have this word context come back again that we discussed yesterday. The individual situation of use of a real person using our system. This is really important. And I want to flip briefly to another short video, just of 1.5 minutes, that digs into this government service design manual. Then we're going to unpick some of the stages and see how they might apply to us. So this is the second short video, only 1.5 minutes, talking about the government service design manual, how it came about, what it means, and how it's implemented. And then we're going to have a look at what lessons can we find for us.
The government service design manual is essentially a repository of tools and guidance and code to explain to teams how they can make digital by default service standard. Now, digital by default service standard is effectively a list of things that service teams need to be able to do or achieved before they get a service launched on gov.uk. None of that's particularly radical. It's things like user testing and working in an agile way and having performance measures and analytics. But it's things that mean that we can produce a really, really clean and unified experience of public services on gov.uk and making sure they're all excellent quality. There's loads of different kinds of resources in the manual and lots of different user needs that needs to meet. So we've tried to design the homepage to reflect that. If you'd like to find out more about why we've chosen to build services in this digital by default way, then click here for some of the background documents about it. You might also want to approach some of the resources and tools through the perspective of the role that you take within the team, whether you're a service manager or a designer, and this section here allows you to do that. Alternatively, you might want to look at it from the perspective of what phase of the project that you're currently in, whether you're at the beginning in discovery or later on in alpha, beta, or live. And finally, you might want to browse all the different kinds of guides and resources that we have in the manual, and you can click here to do that. At the moment, the manual includes everything that GDS has learned about building really, really good government digital services. Over time, we want this to be the manual that owns all the government best practice about digital services and becomes a really useful resource for everyone. We know there's loads more that we can add to this, and we're always looking for more user feedback. Just click on the tab at the top right.
So we see them talking about the government digital service. And if you're interested, subscribe to the Government Digital Service on YouTube, because they go through a whole range of really interesting short videos that explain what they do. Introduction to regulation, building digital services, how to clear websites of inaccessible PDFs, how to get away from the pitfalls in accessibility, how to make inclusive services that are efficient and that deliver value. So they have this issue of starting with needs. And interestingly, they also acknowledge very, very clearly that as a designer producing services, there may be multiple needs, the needs of the users and the needs of the stakeholders. And this they acknowledge. What they also say is do less. Start with simplicity. And we saw this in their example of going through and using analytics to say, how many times has this page or this feature or this piece of content been used? Are people actually using it? If they're not, why not? And do we need it to be there? Can we make things easier by adding simplicity? They also start by designing with data. What is it that people do, and how can we make that stay digital? They talk about designing digital services, digital first, rather than imitating paper, which means that people have access to content information, and the way it's presented, depending upon the type of device, the type of need, and the context, will change depending upon the context. So we're accessing data. And then doing this, do the hard work to make it simple. Rather than offsetting complex problems to the user, which we're also going to see a really interesting example from Jesse James Garrett talking about this in a minute, look at the complicated problems and try and solve them to make things easier for the users. We saw this with the example of calculating maternity pay, where there were half a dozen different websites and pages and pages and pages of rules describing all the situations for every kind of person that might want to access those services. But the person coming to the site is not interested per se in the needs of other people. They're interested in their needs first and foremost. So how could we make it easier for an individual to find out what's applicable to them? In the example we saw, put the next bank holiday clearly at the top, or make a simple calculator that has the rules embedded in it that allows somebody to do a quick calculation based upon their own circumstances. So how can we do the hard work as designers to make it simple for the users? And this is a really important element of iterating and then iterating again, trying an idea, testing it and evaluating it, trying it again and improving. And this Japanese Kaizen idea of continual improvement, but particularly around checking that what we've designed works. What we've designed solves the problem that we set out to solve. And we build based upon inclusion, starting with accessibility as a baseline. Accessible services improve things for everyone. Accessibility is not something that's bolted on afterwards for a special subclass of users that have different abilities to others. We start with accessibility and inclusion, and it grows from there. We also think about this issue of understanding context, and this word context comes back again. And the simple thing to say is who is using it, where, when, how, and why. And what's great in this example is to think about edge cases, those exceptions that prove the rule. To think of a specific example, one that I used yesterday was talking about a young woman with a particular name called, let's call her Janet, that is coming back at night seeking the last bus from a part of town that she doesn't know, having been to the cinema with friends, and she's on her own in the rain in a bus stop trying to find information about the last bus. And we have a very specific scenario, very specific context. And these kinds of examples very quickly show up the benefits of our designs and the shortcomings of our designs. And if you make things open, makes things better. And they're talking here about open design interchange. We see this with what I mentioned, the recently demised Flash, which was very closed. And we see other platforms that are closed and siloed, which means data interoperability and service interoperability, very complicated, very difficult. And the idea of being consistent, they put a caveat. Be consistent, but not uniform. So you have a recognizable style, which is not just a visual style. It's a cognitive style of organization. It's an attitudinal style of how the interaction works, the character of the interaction. Also, the structure and the navigational paradigms become consistent, but not slavishly uniform. So where they need to alter to be appropriate to the content or the situation or the context or the features or functions, they can do, but they're recognizable. And the idea underpinning this, and this is something that I really would urge everyone to think about, is build digital services and not websites. The old idea of websites, when websites started to become a thing 20 years ago, was to imitate printed pages of information, to imitate magazines, to imitate printed books, to use book metaphors. Start with data. Build flexible digital services that transforms the data's presentation to the appropriate context, rather than thinking about building our website with individual pages. Have a look through the Digital Service Manual. Have a dip into some of the videos that are available and think about what lessons you might be able to learn about processes that you can use for yourself. And these processes for a very large project are quite clearly appropriate and important. But also they're appropriate and important for short projects. If your project is going to last a day, these processes will become faster and smaller and shorter, but they're still relevant and vitally important if you want to build effective, creative things that work. So I want to talk about some fantastic examples of where things go a little bit wrong. And there's a great designer, developer, speaker, and now digital and privacy rights advocate, Aral Balkan, who gave a great presentation a couple of years ago at a digital conference talking about heroes and villains in design, and asked this question: can design be so amazing that it makes us feel like superheroes? And can it be so poor that it angers and frustrates us? Can design actually be evil? Now, he discusses a couple of different examples, and his talk is about 35 or 40 minutes long. And I really would urge you to watch the whole talk, and the link is here. I'm going to see if we can watch the first 6 minutes and not get a copyright ban, because he comes up with a couple of really beautiful, clear examples to contrast them and unpicks them in a really, really nice way. And I want to take what he's got to say and then reflect on what his point is and what is going on, particularly as it relates to this idea of process, and a particularly important element that we'll come to in just a moment. So I'm going to see if we can run that now, which is Aral Balkan, Heroes and Villains, and I'm going to take the URL and paste it into the live stream chat. So if you prefer, you can grab the URL from the live stream chat and just watch the first 6 minutes and 40 seconds. The rest of the video is fantastic, and I really do urge you to watch it. It's funny, it's piercing, it's got some great examples, and if you've ever wondered about why a washing machine for washing clothes works the way that it does, and you want to see him completely redesign it live on stage to make a genius piece of design, then watch to the end of the video, because he does exactly that and looks at what is going wrong with the way that washing machines work, and why, which we're going to see in a minute, that decision process and all the knowledge about washing clothes has been offloaded to us as the user because the problem hasn't been solved. So let's see if we can watch this now. And then in 6 minutes and 40 seconds, if you go off, please give me a thumbs up in the chat channel. And let's see what's going on with the white balance here. And we'll watch the video and carry on after. So this is Aral Balkan, Heroes and Villains in Design.
let's get started at the beginning. At the very beginning, where we all start out. Helpless. Helpless and entirely dependent on other people for everything. We quickly realize, though, that there are these other people out there who are not helpless, who can manipulate the world around them, who know about the world around them, who can change things, who know how to do things. And we start seeing these people almost as super people. And in time, we learn about the world around us, we learn how things work, and we become these people. We become this guy and these folks. And then what happens when we finally reach that point where we can change the world, where we can make a difference? Something like this happens. When I see something like this, this is a ticket machine in Stockholm, Sweden. It does only one thing. It sells you a ticket from the station you're at to the airport. That's all it does. Look at how complicated it is. When I see something like this, I feel like that little baby again, but trapped in the body of an adult. I don't know what to do. Why? Let's take a closer look at this. Look at what it has. It's got lots of instructions on how it should be used. That's a certain smell that tells you maybe it's not very intuitive. They've got more instructions. They wrote a novel about it. It tells you which credit cards you can use. It tells you which credit cards you can't use on it as well. It's got a screen with lots of beautifully beveled buttons. And the thing about this is the people who designed this knew that there was something wrong because they built a telephone into it, which you can use to ask for help. So there's some poor person stuck in their mother's basement probably with no natural light who has to answer calls from people at every hour of the day because they could not design this better. Now, I want to show you a machine that does exactly the same thing, but this time in Oslo. Now, remember that this machine does exactly the same thing. This is what it looks like. And here's how you use it. You take your credit card, which is already in your pocket, and you swipe it through, like this man is right now. You swipe it through, and then you walk on the train. That's how it works. That's all there is. You swipe your credit card, you walk on the train. You know, on the other end, you swipe the card again, and you're through. Now, this machine, that ability to just that makes me feel like a superhero. But how can two things that do the same thing be so different? I mean, is it just that the designers in Sweden had no common sense? No, I don't think so. Mostly because common sense is a myth. It does not exist. Common sense is usually what we blame when we've been too lazy to understand a problem that we're solving. What we really need is focus on a very, very important thing. On delivering quality, not quantity. The quote that I love about this is by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince. He says, perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So if you just keep that in your little fingers while you're working on things, I think that alone will help us build better things. Because great design is not about saying yes to things. It's about saying no, 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 no. Even when it's painful. And I would argue that it's most important, especially when it's painful. So going back to the machine in Oslo, they made some very painful decisions. What did they do? They compromised on security. One of the greatest design decisions that they made was compromising on security. What do I mean by this? What do you not see here? In that process of swiping your card and walking on the train, which is so cool, what do you not see? There's no PIN code, right? Because that would have completely ruined that process. It would have been, swipe your card, PIN code, shit, no, yeah, done. You know, that's not me being a superhero anymore. They decided not to have the PIN code. But what happens if you don't take the person's PIN code? well, you're reliable for all the fraud that happens. So their design decision was not what's the border radius going to be or what's the exact shade of color that we're going to be using. Those were far less important. The greatest design decision was, can we afford to take a couple of £1,000 worth of fraud, every year? Can we take that hit? That is design. That's a design decision, not the color that they used on the sticker or on the screen. They also thought outside the screen. The screen here does nothing. It just gives you some instructions. It could just be a piece of paper. We get so caught up on thinking inside the screen when we're designing that we don't consider context and ergonomics, which is exactly what they did here. They considered how this machine would be used in the greater experience of a person who was taking a train somewhere, not just in terms of their tiny little bit of it that they were working on. But most importantly, they did the key thing they did correctly was they thought about the right thing. They worried about the right thing, which was their users' problems, not their own problems. They thought about their users' needs, not their own needs. What do I mean by this? Some of you might be in the tech world, maybe you work on apps, etc. If the first thing you're thinking is, what's my database schema?
So I'm going to stop Aral Balkan there at that point, and I'm going to pick up this last thing from this section of his talk that he pins on. And he points out this issue that actually what we need to be doing is solving the right problem. And this is something that we see all the time happening with software, that the wrong problem is addressed. And the example that he shows here, these two machines that pretty much do exactly the same thing, and seeing the surface implementation of them as being so radically different. One is an incomprehensible device that, from a usability point of view, the ease of use seems to have been spat out from hell, potentially. And the other seems like some dream that you reach into your pocket, you swipe your card, and the thing that you want to happen happens. But it's this question of what is the thing that the user wanted to happen? And Aral Balkan in his video goes on to talk about this digging deeper, going beneath the surface and thinking about the needs of the users. And in this instance, it's very, very clear. When you swipe your card through one of the machines and you get on the train, what you're not interested in is a ticket. What you're actually interested in, what you want to happen, is to go to your destination. And the reason that you're going to the airport or coming back from the airport is because you want to be somewhere else. And that's the goal. That's the goal of the users. The people that use trains. Very few of them, although there is a small subset that like trains as a hobby, pretty much all of the users of trains, the people that use trains, want to go somewhere else. They want to go to work. They want to go home. They want to go to the movies. They want to go to the beach. They want to go and see a loved one. They have some reason to be somewhere else. And the train is just a convenient or sustainable or available way to do that. And their goal is to be somewhere else. But the two sets of designers dealing with these two, one here and one here, let's see, yeah, these two devices, is that one of them wants to sell you a ticket. The yellow machine is completely focused on the problem of selling you a ticket. And the other is focused on getting you to your destination. And this is the challenge of misunderstanding the problem that you're trying to solve. And in one instance, the designers are solving their own problem. We want to sell you a ticket, but the ticket in a train system is an implementation detail. The ticket is only a token to say we've had a fair exchange of value, which is what a lot of business is about. I would like to be somewhere else, and I'd like to get there in a way that's not walking or perhaps using a car. And a train is an appropriate and sustainable way to do that. And in exchange for you letting me ride on your train, I'll give you some money. We exchange value. I get transport easily to go to a goal that I have or destination I want to be at, and I give you some money. And the ticket is just a token to say that that exchange has happened. It's essentially a receipt to say, yes, I've paid my share towards keeping the railway running. But it's only an implementation detail, and the yellow ticket machine is focused on that, as opposed to the goal, which is I want to be somewhere else. And the train is just my way of doing it. So this question of solving the right problem becomes fundamental before we get into what typeface should we use, what type of sensors, what programming language should we be using, what's our database schema, should we be using Zigbee or something else or something else or something else, or should it be AR or VR? Those are just implementation details to solving the right problem. And this is fundamental to interaction design. Understanding the goals of users. As we saw with the Digital Service Manual, starting with needs, not what we guess they are, but what they actually are. And this comes out of research. So this question, and he raised it very, very clearly, is that actually the really significant design decision is not that it's cool and oval or the slot that the credit card so helpfully swipes into. They made the decision they would become liable for the small amount of fraud that could be committed if they didn't have a PIN code. And as he says, they've thought about the context of use. I want to go where I am, into the train efficiently, and go somewhere else. In that process. And the yellow ticket machine doesn't think about where I am. It purely thinks about printing a ticket. And this is an interesting contrast. And these are funny examples of trying to make a point for you to consider. But it is something that you can do on every single project. It is, what is the actual problem that I'm trying to solve? Because it's not about a typeface or a kind of button. There's something beneath the surface. And this idea of beneath the surface comes back again. So I want to move on to talk about processes. And Jesse James Garrett is a user experience designer, company director, writer, and he talks about process a lot. And there's a video that I'd like you to watch, and the YouTube link is here, but we're not going to watch it now. Let me I'm going to paste the link into the chat. I'll paste the link into the chat channel later, but it's embedded in the slide set. And in this talk that he gave in Paris, Garrett unpacks where we are in his view in developing and working with technology. He gives us a little bit of a history lesson. This links back to some of the things that I was trying to propose when we looked at the work from Bill Moggridge, looking at very early laptop implementations and seeing what's going on inside them as an area to design for. And Garrett unpacks some of this in a historical process to say, where are we? Where have we come from? Or what is it that we're actually trying to do to become more cognizant? And he uses some examples of work from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs from Apple Computer, who has had a fantastic influence on the technology that we have around us in the paradigms for desktop computers, for mobile computers, for mobile telephones, for interactive services and goods over the last 40 years. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but one of the things that Garrett picks up in this discussion, which I really do urge you to watch, because he unpacks some things beautifully. It's about 40 minutes long, but you can fast forward through pieces. But he lays out what the idea of user experience is. And he's one of the people that really should know, having started a company called Adaptive Path and was one of the first companies to talk about the idea of user experience. And he unpacks this beautifully about what that actually means, why it makes sense for companies, for goods, for services, products, and users. And he comes down to this quote from Jobs, from Steve Jobs, who says, the goal is making beautiful, elegant solutions that work. And he unpacks what this means. That you make things that are aesthetically pleasing. They're elegant in that they're simple. The Government Digital Service talked about this. They talked about starting with simplicity, removing redundancy. Harold Balkan talked about this, of maximizing simplicity. And he quoted the French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who wrote it looks like a children's novel, but actually it's a modern fable that's also been turned into a great animated film by The Little Prince, who said, perfection is achieved not when there's more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So you strip things down to simplicity, and this aligns with understanding the needs of users. So elegance maximizes simplicity, and a solution is that it addresses a genuine need, solving the right problem, understanding the needs of users. As the Government Service Design Manual says, start with user needs, and then that works, in that it can actually be used by users. And we know this because we test it, and we get away from this designer shouting at users saying, my design is great, you're just using it wrong. So this idea of a beautiful, elegant solution that works underpins a whole range of things that we're trying to talk about when we think about looking at design below the surface. And the surface is only the evidence in the world of how good our design is. So Garrett goes through this video, which I would like you to watch, and starts here with the mechanical typewriter, which after generations of producing devices that would print, this was the pinnacle of technology. The personal electric typewriter that we could type faster and faster and faster, that we could feed paper through, we could set up margins, we could do all kinds of things. It would even print in multiple colors with ribbons going through of different inked colors. And incidentally, if you don't know, if you're sending email to somebody, the initials CC and BCC, meaning send a copy to somebody and send a copy to somebody, but the other people on the list won't see it, comes from a typewriter. That you could type and you'd have a copy. But CC means carbon copy. And what would happen is you put two sheets of paper through your typewriter, one on top of the other, and actually put a thin sheet of carbon in there, or paper covered in carbon dust, so that when the typewriter hit that paper, the keys came down to ink the top copy, it would print a second copy underneath. So you would have a carbon copy that you could send to somebody. The original on top, and then a carbon copy, CC. And you would actually write on your top letter who you were sending the copies to. So it would be like, to dear Dr. Buzzo, CC, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Garrett, and other people. But there was an additional one, which was blind carbon copy, in that you could make another copy, but you wouldn't say who that was going to. So perhaps there's a copy that goes to my boss, but I don't know that the copy's gone to him. And that's where the initials come from. The one that has the delete key, Kat is saying. Unfortunately, typewriter, no delete key. You're typing away and you've got 3/4 of the way through and then you make a spelling mistake. It's there, ink on paper. But Garrett talks about this as a starting point. And he says that the first electronic computerized word processors, i.e. instead of typing and it appearing on paper And if we make a mistake, that's it. No ability to edit, no ability to go back and correct anything. It was there, printed on paper. And if we made a mistake, we have to start again from the top. And we have to get it right. We move at this beginning point of saying we have a technology that does something fundamentally new. Something that didn't exist before. And that was this. And this is WordStar. And this is actually one of the first word processing programs in the world. And this did something that a mechanical typewriter could not and did not do. It did something technological that was new and revolutionary. And it brought the ability to process words, to process letters. So I could type out my letter. And then I could navigate through, delete words, correct spelling, add in punctuation, and preview what I wanted on my letter, and then click print. And that had never occurred before. And it revolutionized pretty much all of written communication or typed printed communication. Previously, people writing books would write them out longhand with a pen and paper and then potentially have somebody type them up, and then they would go through and hand correct the printed pages with more notes, and then they would be typed again as a draft, or they would write on a typewriter, hoping that they didn't make too many mistakes. Every so often screwing things up, and you see this in old movies of people typing away and then get something wrong and they rip the paper out and screw it up and dramatically throw it across the room and put another sheet of paper in. And that was all that was available. And then we have a new technology, WordStar. It was very difficult to use. It was difficult to understand. But that didn't matter because it did something that wasn't available before. But then something else happened. This, as a technological advance, started to become commonplace. Other word processing programs appeared. And the idea of being able to do this was not new. And then what happened is people started to add features to differentiate one solution from another. WordStar from WordPro, from something else, from something else, from something else, from Microsoft Word, from Apple Documents, and on and on. And manufacturers, developers would add features. The other example that he uses is a video cassette recorder. Previous to the video cassette recorder, the VCR, you could watch television, and if you missed a program, that was it. So you could go to the cinema to watch a movie, or you would tune in the television at a specific time. But when you have the ability to record and play back in your individual home with the VCR, that's a technology that never existed before. But as VCR technology became more widespread, and Sony and Philips and Toshiba and 1,000 other manufacturers started producing VCRs, manufacturers add features. Fast forward and rewind, picture stability, 7-day timer, ceramic feet, and thousands more features. And what happens in the world of word processors is we get this. And this is a screenshot from a version of Microsoft Word with every toolbar opened and unfolded. These are all the features that it has. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of features. And Garrett, in his video, makes the argument that every product that's designed tells a story. And he makes the argument that the story behind this, when you look at this as a piece of software, as a design, his argument is that what Microsoft is telling you is that word processing is so difficult to work out how to do it well that the designers at Microsoft came up with all of these features but didn't work out how to make it controllable or understandable. So outsourced that job of making this easy to use to you, to the users, to say, here's all this stuff that it will do. We have no idea how to organize it better than this. You do it. And he says, we have this middle world in technology after we've moved from technology as a differentiator. Previously, we had mechanical typewriters, and then we had a new technology, and we had word processors. And then the word processors and those technologies, when they become more mature, start adding features. And the features proliferate as a way to distinguish one technology from another. This VCR has a timer, this one does not. But there's a point where we become overloaded by features. There is an expression which you don't hear so much anymore, but it used to be applied to software development called feature creep. You would have an idea for a piece of software or a tool or some project or design that would meet a need. And then somebody would say, let's add this and 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 another feature and another feature and a 7-day timer and something that will calculate when it's raining and a little notepad in case you want to make notes and a million more. And the features would add on and add on and add on and add on until the central mission, the central reason for that project or that design would be lost under the weight of these features that were creeping. And we have Microsoft Word with all of these features. And Garrett's argument at the end of this is that these ages have gone. And we're now in the age of designing experiences. In that the experience of using this word processor versus that word processor matters. How easy is this to use? Because if it's something that you're not able to do, it doesn't matter that it's difficult to do it. Previous to the word processor, the mechanical typewriter would not allow me to edit, would not allow me to delete, would not allow me to revise. So that advantage, that fundamental basic ability that's provided by the technology, I don't mind if it's difficult to use. But once we get beyond that and we add features, we actually sit down with the experience to say, I have a goal and what is it like to do that? How do I feel about that? What is the experience of using this? And his argument is that we are now at that point of maturity with technologies where experiences fundamentally matter. And he talks about Jobs, Steve Jobs talking about this, and the quotes that he uses from Jobs are kind of interesting because it harks back to what we saw talking about in the previous session, what we saw talking about from the government digital service and their process of how do we get to this, and also with Aral Balkan. And Jobs says, when you start to look at a problem and it seems really simple, with all these simple solutions, you don't really understand the complexity of the problem. And your solutions are way too oversimplified and they don't work. This is the, I know what you need. And the designer's solving the wrong problems. And Garrett goes on to quote Jobs and says, then you get into the problem and you see it's really complicated and you come up with all these convoluted solutions. And that's sort of the middle, this age of features. Well, we'll add a feature to do this. We'll add a feature to do that. We'll add a feature to solve this thing that we've just caused with our problem. He says, you get into this problem, you see it's complicated, and you come up with all these convoluted solutions. And that's where most people stop. And these solutions tend to work for a while. And this is what Garrett refers to as the age of features. And he takes a parallel and says, we've moved into the age of experience. And quotes Jobs again and says, but the really great person will keep on going and find the key underlying principle of the problem. Potentially, and I would argue, this is understanding what the users need. what they actually want to do, and solving the right problem. So Jobs says, the really great person will keep on going and find the key underlying principle of the problem and come up with a beautiful, elegant solution that works. So we come to this again, a beautiful, elegant solution that works, which is a wonderful ideal to have as a mantra. It's beautiful, it's aesthetically pleasing, it's elegant, it's simple. We fight for simplicity. Simplicity is very strong, but it's actually quite difficult to do. And often people will mask their misunderstanding of a problem by adding complexity. If things seem overly complex, often it's because the person that's presenting the design or the idea to you doesn't really understand it. And it's a solution in that it solves a real problem. It addresses a genuine need, and it works in that it can be used by its users. So Garrett, from this, started looking at how you apply some of these principles initially to designing websites. And he's synthesizing a number of different design approaches, which you'll see written about in different ways. And this is a design approach that's very common, but he put it together quite nicely. There are different versions that use different words, but they all hinge around these same sets of processes in an arc to generating projects or delivering things that work. And he called it the 5 planes of user experience. And the idea is that we go from the bottom, moving upwards. And we start with an abstract idea. And we want to make that abstract idea concrete, which is the top level. We want to move from a conception to a real thing. So we have an abstract idea. I want to help people sleep better. I want to improve nutrition. I want to grow my business. And then what we want to do is make that real, make that something that exists and is happening. And he talks about these 5 planes of a process that we go through, building from the ground up. And we look at each one in turn. And what's interesting about taking this as a model, and it's a great start point for designing and making better designs, is that you can use all of your brain power to focus on just one part at a time, which hopefully means that you make better decisions about each stage of the process, rather than thinking about all of them all at the same time, where they conflict with each other, and you can't ever focus just on one. So he says you start with a strategy plane, the base layer. Why are we doing what we're doing? Who are we doing it for? And what are the needs of that? Not how does it work, what sensors might I use, what color it might be, what typeface it is, how you're going to log in, how much it'll cost. Why are we doing this? Who are the users? What are their needs? And who is the stakeholder, which often is different from the users? The stakeholder is potentially the person paying for the project or sponsoring the project or promoting the project for whom you're designing something. And if there is one thing that this has to do, what is it? At which point you actually do research to understand what is that point. Remembering the example of the ticket machine, in that if the point is to sell somebody a ticket, maybe you've misunderstood the problem. If you look at it and you say, in the example of the ticket machine, what people need to do is move from here to there as easily and efficiently as possible, that's the needs of the users of this system. And what the stakeholder needs to do is make sure that those people pay while allowing them to move efficiently from one place to another. That's fine. Sometimes, unfortunately, the needs of users conflict with the needs of stakeholders, and therein comes a discussion. But at the strategy layer, you just think about these things. Who will be the users of this system? Who are the stakeholders? What does it have to do? And out of that actually becomes a really useful element, in that if you understand what the central goal of that is, perhaps it is to sell tickets to a music festival, to make awareness of a particular health issue. When you understand what that central goal is, you can say, well, how will we measure it? Once we've done this, done all this design effort, deployed it, spent all of this money, done all of this work, how can we test whether what we've done works? We go back to this first question, which is not, do people like the color? But are people now more aware of the health benefits of X, or the health problems associated with Y? Or did we sell enough tickets? Or does it do this particular thing for users or for the stakeholder? And we can evaluate it. But once we understand those things, we can then go to the scope plane. And the idea behind the scope plane is to say, okay, we know what we're doing, what it's supposed to do. Let's look. Does it need to be used underwater? Does it need to be in Mandarin, in Cantonese, in French, in German, in Urdu? What languages should it be in? What devices should it run on? What is the scope of the problem? And to say this is going to be able to be used by everyone on every device is unrealistic. Often that's a start point of wanting to promise everything to everyone. But what you end up with is what, with my bad German pronunciation, is an Eierlänger Milchsau, an egg-laying woolly milk pig. It's the mythical animal that does everything for everyone, and it doesn't exist. And scope can be really, really helpful, because you can start to make hard decisions to say, it will work on this platform, but not that platform. It will be in this language, but not that language. We don't know what it looks like, but we're ring fencing what we design. And it could be that we say, well, these are things that it would be helpful to do in the future. So we'll put those into version 2, or in the plan to version 3, or the plan to version 4. And this is where quite a lot of things come in about starting to shape what your design might be now that you have a direction, which comes from the strategy plane, is to start to use methods like Moscow, the must have, should have, could have, won't have, or SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Lots of different approaches to help you decide what's the broad shape of our design. And from the scope come some parameters that we can build within. And then in the structure, we start to say, what content should be in here? What functions should this have? Not how will they work or how will they be organized, but what content and what functions. And that could be, we need to have the ability to find the names of people. We need to have the ability to find locations of offices. We don't know how we're going to represent that. So we're not saying there'll be a map. We're just saying there'll be information about location. And once we know about the functions and the content, we can then say, how might they be implemented? And we start to look at the skeleton level. Often this is represented in black and white wireframes, which designers love to make. But we can start to say, okay, well, we have the names of all these people. How will we organize it? How will we do the information architecture? Should we organize it alphabetically from A to Z if I'm working in the Roman character set? Should we organize it by department? Should we organize it by age? Should we organize all this content by colorway, starting with red, yellow, orange, green, blue, etc.? Should we organize it by date generated? Should we use exact or ambiguous classifications, such as genre or number? We think about our information architecture and how we organize the content, and at this point we can start with top down or bottom up. What will the user expect? Alongside this, we can look at how we organize our functions, how we implement our functions. So if we do have the need to give location data, how might that be represented? Is it useful to present it on a map? Is it useful to present it alphabetically? Is it useful potentially to present it by location relative to the user, to say, where are you? And we will show you what is it within 1 kilometer or 1 mile of you. Perhaps that's more useful than saying, here is alphabetically A to Z, every office in the whole country, starting with one that's 500 kilometers from you. So the implementation of the things that we've decided in the structure will come into the skeleton. And we'll start to say, where there is this content, we'll need these features. We don't know quite how they'll look, but we know what will be associated with what. In that it might not be relevant to be able to read my messages while I'm using the navigation functions for driving around. They can appear in different parts of the structure of my diagram or my software. And then the last thing that we do when we know why from the strategy plane, how and what it's going to run on from the scope, what content and what functions will be in there and how they'll be represented from the structure and the skeleton, we go to the surface layer. And that's the point at which we say, what color should it be? How will it be visually represented if this is a visual thing? And at the surface plane, that could be to say, actually, this is going to be audio only. We're designing for vision impaired or for audio or for some other particular situation. So at the surface plane, we say, how do we instantiate this into the world? And Garrett expanded this, the elements of user experience, to talk about either on one side, the web as hypertext system, and on the other side, the web as a software interface, in that there's slight differences whether you're saying this is something that's very highly functional or this is very highly information orientated. And although he initially was talking about web development in this instance, this approach is common to other software development and any design process, and that you can actually use some of these things, whether you want to start a restaurant or magazine label, record label, clothing brand, host a party, open an art gallery. To ask these questions in this order allows you hopefully to get away from the pitfalls and relying on being lucky to make a design that works, that you explicitly are iterating, that are asking questions. And what's great about adopting a process, whether this process is appropriate for you or some other version of it, is that it actually frees you as a designer or an engineer to be more creative, to come up with wilder, more experimental designs, because each guess that you make and each wild step that you make is based upon solid facts of the layer underneath. So the book that I recommend is the Jesse James Garrett, The Elements of User Experience. From the website, chapter 2, you can download for free, you can order it online, and it's also available through the UE library as a digital download, and you can reserve the physical book if you would prefer. And what's great about the book is there's lots of really big pictures, and it's a very quick read. But the points that it makes are really easy to comprehend. If we have a look at shape.uedigitalmedia.com. Sorry, Roy has just made a point. This sounds like why Adobe developed so many Adobe products like Photoshop and Illustrators. Yes, absolutely. Just a plethora of projects. So keeping back with Garrett's book, in the downloading recommended reading section, you can get a link to the Elements of User Experience, which you can download elements of online, you can read reviews of, you can buy it if you would like, and also from the library, you can download a digital copy, and also there is a free preview available, and I've made a link to it, of chapter 2 for the Elements of User Experience. And it starts discussing what each of the elements are. So it reiterates what I've just gone through very quickly, but it goes through it in more detail with better examples. And it talks about the 5 planes: the surface, the skeleton, the structure, the scope, and the strategy. Introduces them, and importantly, shows this diagram. And this is something to remember, that it's an idealized process. And as much as we would like to plan it and lay it out to say that it is this beautiful straight line procedure that we will always follow. Like they say in Pirates of the Caribbean, they're more like guidelines. That it's never this perfect finish one part, finish the next part, finish the next part, finish the next part. Design is necessarily a generative and messy and ambiguous process. And rather than being like this top example, it's actually much more like this bottom example, that there's a peak of activity associated with investigating one element. And that will continue to be questioned a little bit and resolved as you move into the next element. And depending upon how long your project is, these processes will take longer or shorter. If you're doing a weekend sprint on a project, each of these necessarily will be much shorter than if you're engaged in a 3-month project for a client. But sitting down and saying, we're going to spend 20 minutes actually talking about what the scope of this is, or what the strategy of this is. Why are we doing this work this weekend? What is it that we want to achieve by Sunday night? Sitting down and spending 20 minutes discussing that and understanding that pays dividends, rather than wasting 2 days and getting to Sunday night and realizing the thing that you've built is fantastic, but doesn't solve any real problem and doesn't come anywhere near the needs of the users. At each stage, taking the appropriate amount of time allows you to be more creative, to make better quality things that solve more problems, that hopefully get to this point that Jobs says of making beautiful, elegant solutions that work. So Garrett talks about the elements of user experience, and he discusses it really clearly in the video that I would, again, recommend that you watch. But this is a process that for this design project that you have ahead of you will be really helpful. And if it's not something that you've done before, really engage with it, rather than just going with the first idea that you fixate on and afterwards pretending that you did this process. Actually, try and let go of your first ideas and sit down and use this as a map to unexplored territory. And the fantastic thing is, when you let go of your preconceptions of what you should be doing and allow the process to lead you there, you end up designing things that you don't know how to build, that you wouldn't have imagined in the first place. So you end up with more appropriate, more creative, more expansive designs. It frees you from only building what you know how to do, what you've already done, from imitating what's already there. It gives you the freedom to discover new things, which is a fantastically exciting proposition, but it's also very nerve-making. It's a little scary because we want to know. At the beginning of processes and projects, we always want certainty. And to start out not knowing what we're going to end up with always makes us a little uncomfortable. But if you can take on board a process, you at least have a guide of the direction that you're going in, knowing that as you make answers at each stage, it will lead you forward. So we begin with observation. And there's an observation process that I would like you to have a think about between now and the next session, which for those of you in Hong Kong will be the same time next Tuesday here on YouTube. Go out into your department, your home environment, your work environment, and find examples of interfaces and or places where you might design an interface. Use a pen, audio recordings or diagrams, and look at how people use different spaces in the building or physical environment that you're in, and consider how you might design an interface to support, interfere with, extend or change the use of that space. So go and look at spaces where people are, and within the caveats that we have, please observe social distancing and safety, but consider how you can change the spaces that are there and how you might record it. So the idea is to look and annotate and think about what's already there. So I'd like you to have a read through these, there's material on the website as well that we'll be referring to. But I'd like you between now and next week to go and have a look at space. This is an extension of what I asked you to do in the previous session, which is to think about an interruption in your immediate life, where you can look internally at what you do, and now to start look at the environment that you're in and how other people interact with it. Think about the interfaces that are present in your physical spaces that you use on the train, on the bus, in the shop, in the building where you live, or the building where you work, or the environment that you travel through. And what kind of interruptions are there, physical, architectural, temporal, or personal? And have a look at how they're used. What is the interface? What do people use it for? How do they use it? And what problems or difficulties do you observe? So this is a task for the next session. So go, observe, record, consider, and do it again. The first set of observations may reveal one particular issue that you can then go and look at and use a research diary, sketchbook, a notebook, some way of recording what you do to be able to refer to them. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can record some of these things. Google Docs, if you don't mind things not being particularly private, GitHub or Hackpad or Prezi or MindMeister. Have a think through. At this point, I want to take a short break. We're an hour and 40 minutes in. I'm going to go and get a glass of water. We're going to take a break for 5 minutes. And after we come back, we're going to, let me find the slide set. We're going to look at tools and techniques for interaction design. So I'd like to take a break for 5 minutes now. I'll leave this up. I'm going to get a glass of water, and then we're going to carry on in just a few minutes. And I want to talk through some practical tools and techniques for how you can move into the next stages and start applying some of these design rules, processes, and questions in your own projects. So I will see you back here in the live stream in just a few minutes. Thanks very much. If you have questions, please do put them into the chat, and I will answer them as soon as I get back. So go take a short break, get a cup of tea, a glass of water, and I will see you back here in just a minute. So, hello, we're back again. Let me just tune the cameras in and see if I can get this looking a little happier. I think that'll do. Right. So I'd like to say welcome back to everyone. We're in part 2, talking about Introduction to Interaction Design, and this is session 2, where we've been talking about processes for interaction design. In this second part, I want to talk about yeah, that'll do. Excuse me, I'm running several different monitors and controlling the stream and all the multiple cameras set up at the same time. So I want to talk about tools and techniques. We've talked about what interaction design is, broadly, that actually we're thinking below the surface. We're looking at these broader questions of who is this for, how might they use it, and how might we get away from worrying about designing interfaces and surfaces to thinking below the surface that gives us reasons for designing. When we come to the idea of solving the right problem, as we saw from Arol Balkan, of designing elegant solutions that work, as we saw from Jesse James Garrett and Steve Jobs, and getting away from excluding people from our discussions. So thinking about tools and techniques that we can practically apply once we think about processes is what I want to go through now. And in the second session, this is probably going to take about 25 or 30 minutes. The slide sets, again, are available online at shape.uedigitalmedia.com. And this is session 2, part 2, tools and techniques. So you can go and download them now if you're interested. And within it, I just want to talk about some practical things that we can think about and apply to our own design processes. So when we start out understanding the needs of users, starting with needs, this is what Digital Service Team at gov.uk said. We can go and do research with people and about people that will use our product, our service, or our design, or in a particular situation. And we can do research into them in a couple of different ways. The primary being splitting our research into qualitative and quantitative. And these are complicated words, but they mean essentially what they sound like. What are the qualities of the things or the people feeling? How do they feel about a particular issue or situation? And quantitative, which is what are the quantities? How many people come? How long do they spend there? How much money do they spend? How tall are they? How heavy are they? How large is this thing? And neither one of those two parts, the qualities, the emotional aspects, and the number aspects, tell us the full story. This is an example that I do when we do workshops together. And please put this into the chat if you are there, because it would be really interesting to see how many people use Microsoft Word. And I keep coming to Word, not because it's necessarily an awful piece of software. There's many other awful pieces of software, and there are many great aspects to Microsoft Word as a product. But it's an easy one because it's very commonly used. The builders have decided they want to join us for the rest of the lecture, so we'll keep going because they're singing the song of their people and telling us how happy they are about how well the sessions are going. Those people that use Microsoft Word, when I ask in a lecture hall full of some hundreds of people who uses Microsoft Word, 95% of the people will put their hands up. Overwhelming percentage of the room, which is the quantitative. 95% of this 200-person sample use Microsoft Word. And I say to them, from this conclusion, you must love Microsoft Word. It must be the most amazing piece of software on the planet because everyone uses it. And this usually gets a laugh because it clearly isn't the most amazing piece of software, and people often don't love using it, though there are many other pieces of software available that people don't like. And that's quantitative, which only tells part of the story. But then I ask a qualitative question. I say, who loves Microsoft Word? Who thinks it's indispensable and they really enjoy using it? And pretty much nobody in the room will put their hands up. Or occasionally there'll be 1 or 2 people out of 200 that will, just to be they'll express their opinion and say maybe 1 or 2% out of a room of 200 people will say, I like using Microsoft Word. To which I would say, well, obviously they mustn't sell a single copy because nobody likes it. Nobody finds it a great, enjoyable or positive experience to use it. Which shows us the qualitative side of the picture, but only shows us part of the picture. But when you bring the qualitative and the quantitative together, this everyone's using it but nobody likes it, we get a much better idea of this complicated picture that Microsoft Word is not the greatest software on the planet. It's not the worst either. It does a particular job, some of it does well, and it also has a fair degree of criticism leveled at it. It's an easy target, but it's a very, very widely used piece of software. And it's not necessarily because people like it or because it's effective. There's maybe something more complicated going on that gives us a deeper insight. So this idea of doing research into our users, into their needs, using qualitative and quantitative, is fundamental. And it can reveal complicated pictures that we don't see from using one or the other. The second thing that we can do is go and do primary research, which is go and try the stuff out ourselves. We can do secondary research, which is finding out about people that have looked at that. We can also go and look at the literature. If we're thinking about this particular design aspect, has somebody else anywhere in the world written about it, thought about it, produced a video about it, written a paper or a book about it? So we can do basic research. And if I'm doing a project just for the weekend, I might spend half an hour doing some research. Depending upon the importance of it, maybe I'll spend a few hours. If I'm doing a project that's going to last several months, maybe I want to do more than just a few basic hours research. After we've done research, we start to think, how can we document our work and the research to support the inquiry? So as I'm gathering information, how do I document that to share it? Perhaps I need to share it with a stakeholder. Perhaps I want to share it with team members. Perhaps I want to keep it so that I can refer to it later. Perhaps it informs part of the design process later on, and I need to actually evidence what I've found. So I can go through and document my work and research in a number of different ways. And it isn't just writing and making spreadsheets, and it certainly isn't just making questionnaires. The simplest is text documentation. I can keep a journal to record ideas, observations, hypotheses. Simplest is a notebook. Keep a notebook and note what you do. If you need to refer to it later, just referring to what's in your memory can be fallible. You forget things, you misremember them. You remember them as you would like them to be, to fit the evidence at hand later on. But if you can refer to contemporaneous notes, documents, observations, you get a much more accurate picture. You can keep a personal journal to record the information, and you can also, out of this, make text documentation about formal reports. And this may be, in this instance, for assignments. It may be to a stakeholder upon stage payments, that they say, can you investigate this issue? And depending upon what the issue is, propose a design for us. And if we like the design and you can propose a reasonable budget, we'll commission you to build it. At different points, you need to collate what you found out. So you could make any kind of text documentation. Also, visual documentation can be a fantastic supporting material. can be a fantastic mechanism for communicating what you do. And also, it can help really illustrate your particular points. So from the visual documentation, you can take photographs. If you take them with a digital camera, they become much more effective. You can do diagrams and drawings. You can talk about the problem domain. Here is a photograph of the actual situation in the shopping center, in the bus station, in the bus stop, in the office, in the user's home, in the shop, of the situation that we are designing for. So people that perhaps have not been there can see it, but afterwards you can refer to it as well. And it may be observation after the fact reveals something that you don't notice while you're at the actual location that you're taking photographs of. You may have research equipment that you want to document. You may want to draw diagrams about steps in the research process, and you can share them with other researchers, teachers or classmates, etc. You can also use those for things like posters, reports, presentations, to describe a particular situation, provide an illustration of it, and explain in the text what's going on and what you want people to observe in the illustration, which may be about nuanced points about your design. Can be really, really powerful. You can also use tables, graphs, and images and other sources to illustrate your points. Now, when you want to come to understanding people, which is this starting with the needs of users, the best thing to do, if you are limited with time, can be ethnographic research. Yeah, it's a complicated word, but basically it means going and looking at what people do where they do it. Asking your friends to do a questionnaire on Facebook about something that they do somewhere else is of limited use. It may have a use, but questionnaires are not hugely effective unless done in very, very large numbers and also crafted very carefully. Ethnographic observation, interviews, design probes, and fieldwork tells you so much. And these can be fancy names of just going and watching what people do where they do it. So if you want to design something for people to use in a nightclub, to use in a swimming pool, to use at the beach, to use on a train, to use in a care home, to use in a hospital, to use in a schoolroom, go to those places and observe what they do. Sit and watch them. Perhaps after you've watched them doing what they're doing, providing you have ethical clearance to be able to do that with the understanding and the permission of the users that you're observing, maybe you could interview them. Have a chat with them. You could ask a few questions and then ask them to reflect, which could be called a semi-structured interview. And from that, maybe you want to find out what they do when you're not looking. You could ask them to do what's called a design probe, which is a complete set of separate lectures. But it could be something as simple as saying, here's a diary. Can you just note down every morning how you feel about a particular subject? And at the end of the week, give me back the diary. And it allows you to get an insight into the lives of users and their needs and their thoughts and feelings that maybe you don't get by observing. You could also ask them to get involved in the design process. And this is broadly called participatory design, which there is a huge science and discussion, a number of different processes. But the idea of including users, people that will use a system in the design process itself, can be a door to making better designs that solve real-world problems. Underneath it is this idea of fieldwork. Rather than sitting in your own home, in your own studio, in your design lab, or your science lab, your development lab, that's your space, making things that fit you as much as you may want them to hopefully fit other people. To go out to where other people are reveals stuff so fast. A fantastic example I had is working with students who proposed a signage system that you could talk to, that would understand multiple languages and could answer simple questions as guidance for tourists. And it was to go into the central station, and tourists could come and ask this simple voice recognition interactive system for direction advice and for help advice about buying tickets and simple information. And it would be able to print out information that people could take away. So it could say, how do I get to X, Y, and Z hotel? Where do I find so-and-so museum? How do I get to such and such a platform? And the system would explain in their natural language, and then be able to print out something that the people could take away, and also do QR code sending for digital data if they wanted signage data. And they did Wizard of Oz mock-up work, and they tried out what this would be like, and they did it in the lab, pretending to be the voice of the system and having people interact with it, and they worked it all out. And I said, please go and do this testing in the field. And they agreed that they'd do that, and they went out one evening as a small team of student designers down to the central station to try out their idea, and they had a cardboard mock-up of the system, and somebody would hide behind it and pretend to be the voice of the system, and they came back thoroughly dejected, but feeling elated also that they'd found something out. And they said, our system completely doesn't work. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, in the station, every couple of minutes there's an announcement over the speaker system, and you can't hear what our system is saying. And this idea of speech interaction in such a noisy, echoing environment just doesn't work. And it was only through the field work that they found out this simple point, but they were able to move beyond and refine their design to cope with the challenges in the field that allowed them to iterate and improve and get down to solving real problems. So field work allows you to experience this idea of context of use, and is essential in the early stages and in testing stages. So when you've got information about the people that will use your system, the environments, their needs, think about ideation of understanding the problems in our problem domain, the area that you want to design for or in. And this refers also to the quotes from Steve Jobs to say that initially people have a limited and simple understanding. They come up with simple solutions, but you need to dig a little bit more. And out of the ideation process, you'll start to find problems with the designs that you come up with by doing iterative testing and coming up with a range of ideas. And design, as I said in the previous session, is essentially generative. It's different from other disciplines in that there is not a linear straight line solution that's only valid in that's valid universally. One may look at a particular problem or challenge or domain and come up with a number of different equally valid or effective solutions. The design will generate many possibilities rather than forming one single linear solution. So out of this we have ideation to find different kinds of designs that may be equally effective for a particular problem or situation. And through the ideation, you'll find insights. And this may come out of the research of saying, well, in our example with the word processing software we were just talking about, everyone uses it, but nobody likes it. What's going on there? And then we have an insight underneath. We realize something we didn't know or understand before. And if you're starting to have insights, that's like digging for diamonds. It means you're making progress, you're getting somewhere. Out of ideation, you can synthesize new ideas and prototype, and you need to go into testing and iterating. And the development process can begin out of this. And development isn't necessarily writing lots of code. Although we end up probably with dealing with electronics and software as central components, actually development can start with a pen and a pencil, prototyping on paper, that we start to think about what the relationships are in black and white. And from our development of paper prototyping as a process, we can do iterative testing. We can actually sit somebody down in front of a paper prototype and say, well, if you click this, it will take you here, at which point you're able to do these things. And sit down with real users and walk them through mock-ups and prototypes to see how they interact, how they react, whether it fulfills needs, what their understandings are, what their problems are. That allows us to iterate before writing code. Out of this, we'll then get evaluation. And as I mentioned in part 1 of today's session, if we can look at our strategy, what Garrett calls strategy, this bottom layer, what in the government service manual they call the needs of users, and we have a clear idea of what our goal is and what the needs are, from there we can make an evaluation. So that when we've delivered our project, We can decide, do we want to open a bottle of champagne or whatever your equivalent is, or go home and have a sad evening realizing that our project has failed? How do we know which one to do? To celebrate or feel a little bit bad that we didn't make what we wanted and it didn't really work very well? And this is having some point of evaluation to say, our project needs to do this central thing, not necessarily have a button that people can click, but their goal is something else. We need to convey people from this location to that location rather than sell them a ticket. We need to support this particular goal, and knowing what that need is allows us to say, how do we test whether we've achieved that or not? So the evaluation can come from real field tests, and we may do user interviews, and we may do ethnographic testing of going and seeing, can people use it in the place where they're supposed to use it, in the context of use. And those evaluations will bring us information back that we can then analyze and think about, have we achieved our goal? From this, we can then reflect and say, well, what went well? What did we misunderstand? What did we not do? And what might we want to incorporate into a future revision, stage 2 of the project, version 2, version 3, version 4, or what lessons can we learn from this that we can apply to the next design or project that we do? And one of the things about having processes and tools is that we can get better at them. We can learn from them and revise those processes so that we can do one project after another, and every time hopefully make better things. As Steve Jobs says, beautiful, elegant solutions that work. And that's the goal of this project. To introduce ideas of interaction design, to get you to think below the surface, to get you to try out processes that allow you to make better designs that suit the needs of users and stakeholders better, that make better use of resources, that are easier to use, that are more enjoyable, that solve problems, and sidestep a lot of the pitfalls that may come along when we're looking at the problems of making projects with technology. So we've been going for about 2.25, 2.5 hours now, and I'm at the end of this second session. If you have questions, please do put them into the chat now, and I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes wrapping up and answering questions if you have them. The live stream will stop in a little bit and will be recorded and will be available online at YouTube/Dan Buzzo. If you have questions, you can email me. You can also contact me and follow me via Twitter, which is @DanB_ZZO. Please hit the subscribe and you can get updates. Leave comments into the session from recording 1 and also from this session, and we'll be doing the next session, which is timetabled, and you can subscribe to the live stream. I'd be grateful if you could do that now. And if you have issues or questions or observations, thoughts yourself, good examples to share, please do so into the chat now or into the comments on the videos when they'll be available, and this one will be available in a few hours' time. And I'm going to come through and read a couple of the comments. Curious Cat, I think, is referring to Microsoft Word. Everyone uses it because of utilitarian nature. It's a word processing workhorse. There are better ways to do things, but it's very, very common. It's an easy interchange, and mostly it works. Iowa is saying, with 256 gigabyte of RAM, I can finally open 8 tabs of Chrome. True, though, everybody uses it. I think this is a reference earlier that Kat was making to multiple notifications being queued up. Roy was making comments as well. He made a comment earlier about Adobe Photoshop. And this is one of the things that understanding and looking at situations reveals for us, is that the world is a lot more complicated than we might hope. And when we design, we put things into the world and they have to exist. They don't exist in isolation anymore like they might do in an idealized, beautiful design or engineering or software studio in our digital agency. they go out into the world. And Johnny Ive, the one of the lead designers that was with Apple, that was behind many of the last 2 decades of successful Apple products, from the first iMac all the way through to a large amount of development of the iPhone and other successful products, said that when a designer designs, they actually end up designing 2 products. The one that they intend and the one that people use. And his meaning is that as much as you might hope people or expect people to use what you make in a particular way, they will use it in their own way, and they will take what you've built and make it theirs. And sometimes that has unintended consequences. The downside of that is, as I mentioned earlier, designers wagging their finger at users and saying, my product is perfectly good, you're just using it wrong. But knowing that in advance about ourselves as engineers, scientists, and designers allows us hopefully to get away from those pitfalls and say, what's really going on? And can we try not to fall into these traps by actually doing our best to understand the needs of users, incorporating them in participatory design, in field studies, in observation and understanding, trying to see the whole picture through quantitative and qualitative methods of trying to get insights, and then iterating and testing our design, and then going and seeing it in the context of use, preparing for it to be changed and altered and improved and replaced, so that we see this as an ongoing generative process rather than imagining there is one perfect solution that fits everyone. So have a think about this in your projects, about what kinds of processes will help you make better designs, that will help you get away from just designing something that you know how to build and actually designing something that works, and then afterwards working out how you build it. And that's a real big challenge. At the end of the slide set, there's a number of references to support some of the things that we've talked about in the last half an hour, 40 minutes, in tools and techniques. The slide sets are available online. If you have questions, please do mail me. If not, I look forward to seeing you on the next live stream, which will be happening at the same time next Tuesday. And next Wednesday. The live streams are available now that you can subscribe to and get a reminder for. If you have any issues, let me know. And as ever, to reiterate, the material is available at shape.uedigitalmedia.com. So if you don't have any more questions, I'd like to say thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you on the next live stream. Please hit the subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.